aware of similar allegations in other agencies in relation to Petrojam? And do you, what would you believe are some of the contributing factors why we have not heard of those wide-scale allegations? I ask the question because one is a systemic weakness that exists, and the other are the underlying values that an individual with responsibility has that would therefore allow them to implement good governance practices that could help to balance the systemic weaknesses. So I really would want to know whether or not, because there are these systemic weaknesses, if we also have these similar issues in other agencies where other ministers have responsibility or other individuals have responsibility.
Member, your question is appreciated, but it is not encouragement for more, but it is for more questions. You have more?
I was willing to put them on the table so you could answer. But because I think it is important for us to understand why it is that with these systemic weaknesses, in some areas we have this kind of a breakdown in accountability and governance, and in other areas we don't. Right? So that's one. Secondly, and I'm very glad, Prime Minister, that you spoke about ministerial interference, because what you have done is to place in the room the white elephant that we had been ignoring. Because out there, these are some of the real questions that persons are asking. Because when the member spoke about the process to hire, for example, the HR manager, is the HR manager a friend to the minister? Does the minister know that individual well? Is that individual on any other boards, organizations with which the minister is acquainted? And therefore, in the minds of many Jamaicans, that is the question they are asking. Was there any undue influence from the minister in terms of the hiring, for example, of the HR manager? Have you asked that question specifically, and have you been given an assurance of whether that is so or not? And are you satisfied with the response that you have been given? You know, persons want to know that. The third question, related to that, Prime Minister, the issue of connectedness is one that raises concerns. It raises concerns because, as the member had said earlier from South St. Catherine, I think it was, that the individual that one suspects could be connected is the individual responsible for the donations and the contributions. And we cannot forget that in all of that, there is the issue of a letter that was written seeking a donation, a letter that was written to say, okay, don't give me, but somebody else will get it. And we haven't really heard any real explanation or any real attention being paid to that, especially to Prime Minister, because of those contributions that I'm talking about, we were told are contributions, are donations for the minister's constituency. So the question is asked against that background because it raises those questions.
Dr. Brownbrook, please just continue with the questions and not make a presentation.
Mr. Speaker, I have not been here 9 months. I have not been here 9 months. And I assume that 9 months is a long period in which to have learned all the procedures and be very familiar with exactly how questions are to be asked. And I am using that 9-month period specifically. I am using that 9 months specifically because my other question, Mr. Speaker, is that with the board not having met for 9 months, are we to understand, Mr. Prime Minister, that did not cause any concern. No questions were raised. No one would have brought that to the attention of anyone in terms of it being an issue, especially based on some of the projects that were on the table. And so one would have needed the kind of oversight that would have required more frequent meetings. My final question, Mr. Prime Minister, is after you said that some of the decisions taken or actions probably would have been made known after the fact. The question I want to ask is, since that, after the fact, those things that have been made known, what action has been taken since in relation to a number of those, and I'm talking about in particular the contributions, the donations. I'm also talking about some of the weaknesses. I'm talking about the questions around the connectedness. Have these actions been taken only since public scrutiny has been brought, or was the cabinet aware before it became pronounced in the public domain? In other words, I want to make sure that the question is clear. I want to know if any of what we're talking about came to cabinet prior to it coming here, being raised by some of the members on this side. Was any action taken before? Was it brought to cabinet before? That is the final question that I wanted to ask.
Member, you're going to help me with the specifics of the question, but your last question is, the cabinet became aware of these issues when they were raised in the public domain. And that is how the oversight of Parliament works. The opposition brings issues, works through the PAC, the public may hear, and the various investigative bodies may hear. The cabinet has oversight as well. If something comes to my attention as Prime Minister or any other minister, it is raised in cabinet, and we ask questions, and as far as we can in law, we investigate. But the short answer is, when we became aware of it, then we took action. And the actions have been outlined in my statement, and I'm certain that as a result of those actions, it will be highly unlikely that there could be any repeat of the issues of concerns that were raised. You would remind me of your other questions, just the synopsis of them.
It was around the systemic weaknesses and whether or not some of the breaches that we have seen in Petrojam also exist in other agencies. And if not, then why?
The systemic weaknesses, so Cabinet used its knowledge of the enterprise of government to see where one flaw in the law could be exploited system-wide. This is not to say, and it was not in my statement, that it is actually being exploited system-wide. So I never said that there was wide scale, but the one weakness in the law, regulation and policy applies to all agencies. So potentially it could be used, and so we are closing those loopholes. However, I think that this is a lesson to all ministers, and I think as a result of that, all ministers are looking very closely at their portfolios and are looking at where weaknesses are and are looking to have accountability and to close those issues. So I think, out of this exercise, ministers are, are increasing the scrutiny of their portfolios.
Mr. Prime Minister, in terms of the question that was asked, there's a second part to that, which is around, I wasn't suggesting that you had indicated that the breaches were widespread, but that was precisely the question that I was asking. Would you agree that quite possibly the underlying values of the individual with overall responsibility will also be part of what prevents some of the breaches from taking place, or will make these systemic weaknesses, they'll be more susceptible then to these systemic weaknesses so that the breaches like these could occur?
I think that in the instant case, so when you strip away, so, you know, it's an important question. When you strip away the weaknesses in the policies, and we address that, then you have to address now weaknesses in management, and then you have to address weaknesses in governance, including any weaknesses there may have been in ministerial oversight. So I think we have adequately addressed the weaknesses in the policy, the regulatory environment, as much as we can based upon what we have discovered from our limited investigative ambit. We have started to address weaknesses in governance and management, which are really personnel issues. And I think that we have started on that process, and that process will be continuing. Those weaknesses are by virtue of how the management and the board chose to execute their duties and responsibilities. Some of it might have been they don't have the knowledge. Other of it might have been that they totally disregarded the law, having the knowledge. And other of it, it could just be, an intent. So whatever it is, once we have identified, we have taken action. The other issue which I see that you're trying to get at is whether or not the minister's oversight or lack of oversight affected the entire ministry. And I personally looked for that, because that is a part of the decision-making process that I have to go through. And so when I interviewed the Energy Division, which is the only division I have interviewed in the minister's portfolio, in the former minister's portfolio, the response was clear that the policy is going forward, that all the other agencies are going fine. It is only at Petrotram that there seems to be this management problem. I have to look at all the other agencies, and as I look and I discover, as I said, the policy and the principle is to act proportionately and appropriately.
I ask for your indulgence for just one clarification as it relates to. I was just wondering, Prime Minister, whether or not you thought, you understood why many individuals, having listened to the minister's response to questions last time we were here, and the fact that he seemed not to be aware of so many of the questions that were asked after all of the public discussion around it. I mean, I really appreciate what you have brought in terms of your knowledge and the briefing that you got. But when the questions seem to be, the answers rather, seem to be so evasive, seem to indicate a lack of either interest to acquaint oneself to answer the questions, do you understand why it is reasonable for many of us here and Jamaicans at home to be concerned about the minister's attention to detail, the minister's interest in what is happening? And I'm not talking about interfering in what are managerial decisions. I'm just talking about an overall attitude to the portfolio responsibility.
This is your last question, and having regard to the time. Members, the question you're asking is, how do I judge the minister and the exercise of ministerial craft? It's very difficult to judge on that. Each minister has their own idiosyncratic way of delivering, of answering questions. What I have to do, as I've said before, is to distill all the allegations, everything down to some objectives, to objective and factual matters on which to act. And just to repeat, that is what I am doing. So I take all the concerns that have been raised, as you have said them, they have been raised to me. You know, there's a matter of style, there's a matter of, you know, the minister's own exercise of his duty. I pay attention to that. But at the end of the day, in taking decisions, we have to take them on verifiable and manifest facts. And that's what I'm doing. Mr. Speaker,
House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I think in this honorable House today we can all be grateful to the Prime Minister for this very fulsome explanation. A job well done. However, Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today. So I ask that you suspend this honorable House, adjourn this honorable House until the 17th of July, at which time we will deal with the extension of the state of emergency and other matters. We will have a full day. So I'm imploring the opposition to attend and participate in what promises to be a very lively day. It is intended also, Mr. Speaker, to adjourn Parliament for a date to be fixed. After that, we will be going on holiday for the summer month. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask that you adjourn this honorable House until next Tuesday at 2 p.m.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned.